Okay, social consciousness can surpass social being. In affirming the fact that social consciousness is often backwards compared to social being, historical materialism at the same time posited that under certain conditions, human thought, especially those of advanced scientific ideas, can precede the development of social being and even predict the future. They can have the effect of organizing and directing human practical activities and directing the activities to solve problems caused by the mature development of the material life of society. Ultimately, however, the ability to precede social consciousness still depends on social being. Hold on, we got a picture, everybody. So right there, that looks like feudalism, maybe? Feudal social consciousness, and then next to it you have socialist social consciousness. So you have remnant and progressive, right? You have the social consciousness and social being. Lags behind, surpasses. So, capitalist mode of production. All right. Social consciousness, which lags behind, is considered to be a remnant of past societies, while progressive social consciousness surpasses social being. Got a restriction already. Jesus Christ. Maybe it's the pictures, I don't know. Scientifically, gathering knowledge can often lead to forms of social consciousness, which surpasses social being. For example, of this would be the social consciousness of climate change. Scientists who study the climate, the environment, the weather, and other such fields have been warning human society about climate change for many decades and calling for changes of productive forces, which would restrain or reverse climate change. The social being of society at large, however, has lagged behind this social consciousness. The bourgeoisie states and corporations which have the power to work against climate change have been very slow to effect meaningful change. Some workers recognize the threat of climate change and can essentially predict the future of what will happen to the planet if climate change continues to worsen unchecked, but most of society is conversely lagging behind and failing to see climate change for the threat that it has been scientifically proven to be. Another example would be class consciousness under capitalism. Many human beings, including Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, were able to identify the contradictions of capitalism and the unsustainability of the capitalist mode of production very early on. In this sense, they are able to develop social consciousness which surpassed the material base of society, which remains capitalist to this day. Some workers recognize and believe in the eventual downfall of capitalism, despite the fact that capitalism is still entrenched as a predominant mode of production on Earth. Such workers surpass the current material base of society, and predominant capitalists impose social consciousness. Such social consciousness, which surpasses social being, is considered progressive. As is social consciousness can lead to advancement to higher stages of development of human society. Developing the social consciousness of the working class is key to the mission of scientific socialism, which seeks to overthrow capitalism through the application of dialectical materialism and historical materialist theory and practice. See, this is too soon to do the notes. I'm gonna go on, okay? What do you think? Agreed? Okay. Okay. Social consciousness maintains the characteristics of inheritance in its development. Historical development of social consciousness shows that the theoretical view of each era did not appear simultaneously from nothing, but are developed on the foundation of theories inherited from previous ages. This is simply a manifestation of the inheritance characteristic of development in the development process of social consciousness. Since social consciousness was inheritance has an inheritance characteristics in its development, it is impossible to fully understand any given idea based only on presently existing economic relations. It is necessary to consider previous stages of development. The development history of consciousness has shown that periods of prosperity or decline in philosophy, literature, art, etc. do not always perfectly line up with periods of economic prosperity or decline. Because the principle of inheritance, social consciousness always contains elements and characteristics which are inherited from previous forms of social consciousness. Such inherited characteristics can take the form of customs, traditions, cultural practices, and so on, and can be reflected in social consciousness in countless ways. There are, for example, countless ways in which ideas from feudal societies have influenced and persisted through the modern capitalist era, i.e. the establishment of the social institutions of the monarchy in modern capitalist nations, like the United Kingdom. Such an institution is clearly a remnant from feudal era of society. The monarchy does not function in exactly the same way as it did in the feudal era, but it influences social consciousness in countless ways. Even though the bourgeoisie has been the ruling class of the United Kingdom for a very long time, the institutions of monarchy and many other remnants of feudal society have been inherited by the modern capitalist societies of that nation. In a class-based society, the inheritance nature of social consciousness is associated with its class character. Different classes inherit different ideas from previous eras. The progressive classes received the legacy and progressive ideology left behind by the old society. Lenin emphasized that socialist culture needs to promote the best achievements and traditions of human culture from the antiquity of the present on the basis of the Marxist worldview. In The Task of the Youth League, he wrote, proletarian culture must be the logical development of the store of knowledge mankind has accumulated under the yoke of capitalism, landowner, and bureaucratic societies. The progressive classes which are emerging to become new classes that will be more suitable to the emerging productive forces during the transition period where the mode of production is being negated by the next. For example, when capitalism was first beginning to emerge, the progressive classes were the bourgeoisie and proletariat. The bourgeoisie became the ruling class in the capitalist mode of production, while the proletariat became the oppressed working class. Today, the proletariat is a progressive class because it will, in time, become the ruling class of the capitalist mode of production, becomes negated within human society. The following is a full passage from Lenin, from which the above quote was taken. In this passage, Lenin emphasizes the importance of understanding and leveraging inheritance in developing the social classes of communist revolutionaries. We must bear this in mind when, for example, we talk about proletarian culture. We shall be unable to solve this problem unless we clearly realize that only the precise knowledge and transformation of the culture created by the entire development of mankind will enable us to create a proletarian culture. The latter is not clutched out of thin air. It is not an invention of those who call themselves experts in proletarian culture. That is all nonsense. Proletarian culture must be the logical development of the store of knowledge mankind had accumulated under the yoke of capitalist landowners and bureaucratic societies. All these roads have been leading and will continue to lead up to the proletarian culture in the same way of political economy, as reshaped by Marx, has shown us what human societies must arrive at, shown us the passage of the class struggle to the beginning of the proletarian revolution. What Lenin means here is that the quote-unquote proletarian culture, i.e. social consciousness of the working class, cannot be developed without a material base as well as preceding forms of social consciousness. Rather, it must be recognized that the seeds of proletarian culture exist in the currently existing social consciousness in accordance with the inheritance of principle. Building social consciousness is a prerequisite of social revolution. This means that workers must build a proletarian culture for ourselves. This culture must recognize the role and mission of the working class to end capitalism and class society. But this proletarian culture cannot simply be dreamt up in the minds of revolutionaries and then imposed upon workers. Instead, revolutionaries must understand the relationship between social consciousness and social being, as well as the process of development in dialectical materialism and historical materialist terms. By understanding these relationships, the process of development, it becomes possible for revolutionaries to consciously affect, change, and develop a proletarian culture of class consciousness within the working class over time. As Lenin further explained, it is the role of the revolutionary ideologists to develop positive aspects of social consciousness that are suitable with communism, while negating aspects which are reactionary and impeding the development of class consciousness. When we so often hear representatives of the youth, as well as certain advocates of a new system of education attacking the old school, we say to them that we must take what was good in the old schools. We must not borrow the systems of encumbering young people's minds with the immense account of knowledge, 9/10 of which was useless and 1/10 distorted. This, however, does not mean that we can restrict ourselves to communist conclusions and learn only communist slogans. We will not create communism that way. You can become a communist only when you enrich your mind with a knowledge of all the treasures created by mankind. This is similar to observation made by Ho Chi Minh about developing the social consciousness of the proletariat. Vietnamese textbook, Philosophy and Marxist-Leninism, explains. For example, when the bourgeoisie performed its social revolution against feudalism, advanced thinkers of the bourgeoisie restored many materialist and humanist ideas from ancient times. Likewise, the absolute classes and their thinkers absorbed and restored the anti-progressive social ideas and theories of previous historical periods, i.e. religious and idealist conceptions of the divine roles, quote-unquote, of kings. The feudal class of medieval Western European countries during the period of feudal decline tried to exploit Plato's philosophy, the idealist elements from the philosophical systems of Aristotle of ancient Greece, using them as basis of philosophy of Christian teachings. In a similar manner, during the second half of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, reactionary bourgeois forces restored the developed idealist philosophical and religious movements under the new names such as Neo-Kantianism or Neo-Thomism, Thomism, Thomism, etc., to fight against the revolutionary movement of the working class and its ideology, Marxism. The divine role of kings as a religious and political ideology that argued that kings had power bestowed upon them directly by God. This was an ancient philosophy which monarchs such as Louis XIV of France restored to justify their rule over society, as monarchy and feudalism were challenged in the 18th century. Similarly, the bourgeoisie restored aspects of ancient Greek philosophy to justify their social revolution against feudalism. Examples of this from the French Revolution included Aristotle's concept of civic fraternity, which was manifested in the French Revolutionary slogan of liberty, equality, and fraternity. As the bourgeoisie cemented itself as the relations of equality and fraternity did not include equality as it pertains to relations of production, and workers were deceived into believing that fraternity meant that workers should support the power and privilege that capitalists had as it pertained to ownership of the means of production. In this manner, ancient Greek ideas were developed to suit the capitalist mode of production. In other words, the meaning of these concepts shifted to justify and uphold the class position of the newly formed ruling class of capitalists. A similar shift in the meaning of ideas within social consciousness occurred when capitalism was challenged by Marxism and communist revolutionary movements in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Another 10-minute restriction. Jesus fucking Christ.
Hello?
Hey, hold on. I'm not done yet. Almost there. Jesus. All right. Similarly, where was I at? Yeah. Similarly, shift in the meaning of ideas within social consciousness occurred when capitalism was challenged by Marxism and communist revolutionary movements. Already read that, didn't I? Did I already read that? No, I haven't.
No, I don't think you have. I had, but I don't think you
have. Let me do it. A similar shift in the meaning of ideas within social consciousness occurred when the capitalism was challenged by Marxism and communist revolutionary movements in the bourgeoisie and religious ideologists began to revive the development of older philosophies originally conceived by figures from the feudal era, such as Immanuel Kant and Thomas Aquinas. These feudal ideas were altered and justified to establish social relations of capitalism and to argue against Marxist ideology and communist revolution. This is a manifestation of the inheritance property of materialist dialectics within human society. Base level concepts and ideas can be inherited into newer forms of social consciousness. All right, now it's your turn.
All right. Let me put this right here. All right, so back to the first section. Social consciousness can surpass social being. In affirming the fact that social consciousness is often backwards compared with social being, historical materialism at the same time posits that, under certain conditions, human thoughts, especially those of advanced scientific ideas, can precede the development of social being and even predict the future. Social consciousness, which lags behind, is considered to be a remnant of past society, while progressive social consciousness surpasses social being. Developing the social consciousness of the working class is key to the mission of scientific socialism, which seeks to overthrow capitalism through the application of dialectical materialist and historical materialist theory and practice. Next section. Social consciousness maintains the characteristic of inheritance in its development. The historical development of social consciousness shows that the theoretical views of each era did not appear spontaneously from nothing, but are developed on a foundation of theories inherited from previous ages. This is simply a manifestation of the inheritance characteristic of development in the development process of social consciousness. Since social consciousness has inheritable characteristics in its development, it is impossible to fully understand any given idea based only on presenting existing economic relations. It is necessary to consider previous stages of development. The development history of consciousness has shown that periods of prosperity or decline in philosophy, literature, art, etc., do not always perfectly line up with periods of economic prosperity or decline. The progressive classes are classes which are emerging to become new classes that will be more suitable to emerging productive forces during a transition period where one mode of production is being negated by the rest. And then Lenin said, we must bear this in mind when, for example, we talk about proletarian culture. We shall be unable to solve this problem unless we clearly realize that only a precise knowledge and transformation of the culture created by the entire development of mankind will enable us to create a proletarian culture. And what Lenin meant was proletarian culture, i.e. social consciousness of the working class, cannot be developed without a material basis as well as preceding forms of social consciousness. Rather, it must be recognized that the seeds of proletarian culture exist in the currently existing social consciousness in accordance with the inheritance principle. Building class consciousness is a prerequisite to social revolution. It is the role of revolutionary ideologists to develop positive aspects of social consciousness that are suitable with communism, while negating aspects which are reactionary and impede the development of class consciousness. And then the last thing was the paragraph. So, a similar shift in the meaning of ideas within social consciousness occurred when capitalism was challenged by Marxism and communist revolutionary movements in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. As the threat of communist revolution increased, bourgeois and religious ideologists began to revive and develop older philosophies, originally conceived of by figures from the feudal era, such as Immanuel Kant and Thomas Aquinas. These feudal ideas were altered to justify the established social relations of capitalism and to argue against Marxist ideology and communist revolution. This is a manifestation of the inheritance property of materialist dialectics within human society. Base-level concepts and ideas can be inherited into newer forms of social consciousness. That's all the notes.
All right, thank you. I got another restriction, by the way, but it got appealed. The interplay between forms and social okay, let me repeat that. The interplay between forms of social consciousness and in their development. The interplay between forms and social consciousness is a reason why in each form of social consciousness, there are aspects and properties that cannot be explained directly by examining social being. This relationship is one in which social consciousness is relatively dependent of, but also determined by, and can be impacted back upon social being. Social consciousness is relatively dependent from social being, just as consciousness is generally a relatively independent from the material world in general. Relative independence is not the same as complete independence. Complete independence would apply a complete lack of connection between two subjects. Relative independence simply means that one subject has its own development, even if these developments is dialectically impacted or determined by another subject. The belief that consciousness can be completely divorced from material reality is a form of idealism. Consciousness also not completely determined by the material world. Rather, consciousness, though determined by the material world, is capable of impacting back on the material through human conscious activities. The belief that consciousness is completely determined by the material world is a form of mechanical materialism. It is important to avoid both these extreme misinterpretations of the relationships between matter and consciousness, idealism and mechanical materialism. Let's see if I get another one. Here, you see social being and you see social consciousness. Idealist conception of the relationship between social being and social consciousness. Okay? It says it doesn't impact, basically. Idealism views consciousness as completely separate from the material reality, or upholds the idea that consciousness completely determines the material world. Idealism thus overstates the independence of consciousness from matter. And now you see the next picture. This picture is that social being completely determines the social consciousness. Idealist conception, because now this is idealist because social consciousness can still has an impact. So idealist conception of the relationship between social being and social consciousness. This is mechanical materialism. Mechanical materialism views consciousness as completely determined by the material world and sees consciousness as an illusionary phenomenon that cannot impact back on matter. Mechanical understates the independency of consciousness from matter. Next picture. Next picture, Joe. All right, here we go. Now we see that the social being determines the social consciousness, and social consciousness impacts. That's the historical materialist conception of relationships between social beings and social consciousness, because it's a dialectical relationship. Thank you, Joe. Who's in here? We'll bring this person up. All right. Dialectical materialism correctly interprets the relationships between matter and consciousness by viewing consciousness as relatively independent from matter. Matter and consciousness have their own internal development processes, but they also mutually develop one another. The relative independence of social consciousness from social being reflected, and relative independence of consciousness from matter. Social consciousness development is determined by social being, but there are also internal relationships within social consciousness, within itself, which lead to internal development, social consciousness. Superficially, social consciousness forms can interact with each other to internally develop social consciousness. But ultimately, all social consciousness forms are derived from the determined by material conditions. It should be noted that this includes false consciousness, which also determined the material reality. For example, of forms of social consciousness developing each other can be found in the religious traditions of Vietnam. This development reflects the relationship between matter and social being, and social consciousness, and consciousness / social consciousness. The modern religious practice of Dao Mun involves the worship of Mao. I think it's Dao Mao. Mao, the mother goddess of Vietnam. This religious form of social consciousness originated in and is unique to Vietnam that stretches back over thousands of years. Dao Ma has its roots in ancient Vietnamese society, which was matriarchal. Vietnam's earliest religious revolved around the worship of various goddesses of nature, such as goddesses of the sun and of the moon, as well as goddesses of rain, thunder, fire, and so on. During the ancient era of Vietnam, this religion was developed to justify and reflect the power of female rulers. Whenever a powerful queen or princess died, Vietnamese religious leaders would build temples to those matriarchal rulers and venerate them as goddesses. Examples such as religious worship of rulers included the two Trung sisters, Empress of Vietnam, who defeated the Chinese Han Dynasty, as well as Dong Von Nang, another queen of Vietnam, who helped defeat the invasion led by Chinese Song Dynasty in the 10th century. Taoism was another important religious social consciousness form which came to Vietnam in the 2nd century. Taoism, not Taoism, Taoism, Daoism, was heavily affected ancient Vietnamese religious beliefs. Specifically, Vietnamese people tended to incorporate matriarchal deities such as the Mother of Sky, the Mother of the World of the Dead, etc. Such female deities were synthesized into older matriarchal religious social consciousness forms which had already been prevalent in Vietnam. Vietnamese people began to worship both Dao Moon and Taoist goddesses simultaneously. Over time, Dao Mon, MAU, began to incorporate more formalized systems of worship, which were more similar to Taoist religious practices, such as a clear system of ceremonies, rituals, customs, and so on. This is an example of forms of social consciousness influencing each other in the matter that was relatively independent of material reality. This social consciousness was relatively independent. Examinations of Vietnamese social being in and of itself through these 2,000 years of history would be sufficient to fully understand why Dao Miao existed in its current form today. In order to understand Dao Miao, I can't say it, it is necessary to also examine the development of forms of social consciousness in Vietnam. It is vital to also examine the material conditions of social being of Vietnam to understand Dao Miao in its current form, since Dao Miao reflects and was in many ways determined by historical relationships of production, such as ancient Vietnamese societies, which was dominated by matriarchal monarchs. Vietnamese feudalism with its systems of royal and noble families, as well as influences from foreign ruling classes, such as those in China, which determined the development of Taoism. Ideology is... Oh, wait, you want to look at it? Okay, we'll look at it. A painting of the Pantheon of the goddess of gods of Vietnam, Dao Miao, religion dating from the 19th to early 20th century. Thank you. Oh, Taoism is the correct name of Taoism? Okay, thank you. Ideology is the most advanced form of social consciousness, as explained in annotation 65. Ideologies have the highest potential to impact social being and material base of human society through conscious practical activities. The level of impact of ideology on the development of society depends on various factors. This is discussed more on page 147. Because ideology's development is so complex, we must differentiate the roles of progressive ideology and anti-progressive ideology as each pertains to social development. As philosophy of Marxism and Marxist-Leninism explains, historical materialism holds to the principle that social consciousness is relatively independent and quite complex in its development. Historical materialism rejects all metaphysical, mechanical, and vulgar viewpoints about the relationship between social beings and social consciousness. The historical development of social consciousness shows that certain forms of consciousness tends to emerge first and have a strong impact on the other forms of consciousness. This pattern of development occurs in almost every historical era and is determined by specific historical circumstances. In ancient Greece, philosophy and art played a particular vital role in social consciousness. In the medieval Western Europe, religion had a strong influence on all other forms of social consciousness: philosophy, ethics, art, politics, and the rule of law. In Western European countries, in the more recent historical period, political consciousness has played a significant role, strongly influencing other forms of social consciousness. In France, from the second half of the 18th century, as in Germany at the end of the 19th century, philosophy and literature were the most important tools for the propagation of political ideas in the arena of political struggle of the progressive classes. Today, in the interplay between forms and social consciousness, political consciousness still often plays a particular vital role. Different kinds of social consciousness forms will have more prominent and influential roles in the development of different human societies and at different stages of development of those societies. In ancient Greece, philosophers such as Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates played an important role in shaping the social consciousness of the Greek people. Ancient Greek artists played a similar role in shaping social consciousness with famous works of art, such as the statue of Venus de Melio, Zeus of Olympia, Athena, etc. Philosophy and art of this era were determined by the material conditions and social being of ancient Greece. Hold on a second. But were also instrumental in development of Greek worldview and making Greece one of the most highly developed societies in its era. Religion played a very important role in the feudal era of medieval Europe. The Catholic Church was a dominant religion, greatly affected every aspect of Western European society during the feudal era. In most medieval European countries, the Catholic Church was the state, had a very close relationship, and the state existed in part to defend the church. The nature of this relationship is defined in the laws issued the Catholic Church in 1825, known as Quo Gravera, which declared, here it is, Pope Leo the Great defined the roles of the state as being the defender of the church, cause and suppressor of heresies, in the letter to the Eastern Roman Empire, Leo the First, I think. Quote, you ought unhastenedly to recognize that the royal power has been confirmed to you, not only for the rule of the world, but especially for the defense of the church, so that by suppressing the heinous undertaking, you may defend those statutes which are good and restore true peace in those things which have been disordered. In modern capitalist Western Europe, political social consciousness forms have played an important role in the development of social consciousness. As feudalism gave way to capitalism, many new political ideas appeared in Western Europe, such as Hegelian idealism, Kant's humanism, utopianism, and Marxist-Leninism. This emerging political social consciousness also influenced literary and artistic social consciousness in Europe. For instance, European novelists wrote frequently about political aspects of European society. Such works included La Miserere, I can't say that word, by Victor Hugo, War and Peace by Leonardo Tolstoi, and so on. To this day, political consciousness continues to be the most important form of consciousness in our current world, and it has become a primary battlefield between the capitalist class and the working class. Political consciousness. Hold on a second, I'm trying to see something. No. I'm waiting for that little thing to go away. Come on. All right, looks like I'm good. Political social consciousness forms can be found everywhere, in the novel, in music, in newspaper, in films, and on social media. The ruling class of the U.S. has spent billions of dollars producing media, information outlets, and social media platforms which produce propaganda, and media which support and defend capitalist relations of production. All of these social institutions exist to defend the advanced forms of social consciousness which reflect the agenda of the capitalist ruling class. An important mission of communists and the working class is to push back against such capitalist social consciousness forms and to build ideologies and social institutions which advance and defend communist social consciousness forms. Developing The social consciousness of the working class is an important prerequisite of social revolution, which will lead to the dictatorship of the proletariat and eventually an end to capitalism and class society altogether, as explained The political consciousness of the revolutionary class orients the progressive development of other forms of consciousness. Because social revolution must be filled through the construction of the state which enforces the agenda of the ruling class. Political struggles is one of the most important battlefields in class struggle. An objective prerequisite for social revolution is that a revolutionary class achieve class consciousness and grasp their own historical mission to build a state and become the ruling class. Therefore, political consciousness defined as awareness of the importance of controlling the state and, by extension, the means of production, plays a crucial role in the progressive development in all other forms of social consciousness, which are dialectically related. For example, political consciousness must orientate morality consciousness. Communists must teach workers about the unethical nature of capitalist exploitation of the workers, i.e., that it is unethical for capitalists to steal labor value from workers, and that it is unethical for anyone to lack food, healthcare, etc. Political consciousness must orient legal consciousness. Communists must make it clear that the legal system must be on the side of the workers. Communists must struggle to protect workers from unjust laws and to force the government to pass laws that will improve conditions for workers. Political consciousness, which orientates aesthetic consciousness, art, entertainment, and other forms of media, are vital for influencing the social consciousness of the workers. Communists must therefore produce art and media that advances class consciousness while critiquing art and media that serves the agenda of the bourgeoisie. These are just some of the ways in which communists must use political consciousness to orient all other aspects of social consciousness. It is important to remember the principles of general relationships of dialectical materialism, which states that all things, phenomena, and ideas are dialectically related to each other and mutually develop each other. All social consciousness forms are ultimately related to political consciousness. All of these forms of social consciousness, taken together in unity, impact back on the social being of society. You're next.
Okay, good. Thank you, because I have a bit of notes on this section. It was a lot of information. The interplay between forms of social consciousness is a reason why, in each form of social consciousness, there are aspects and properties that cannot be explained directly by examining social being. This relationship is one in which social consciousness is relatively independent of, but also determined by, and can impact back upon, social being. Social consciousness is relatively independent from social being, just as consciousness in general is relatively independent from the material world in general. Relative independence is not the same as complete independence. Complete independence would imply a complete lack of connection between two subjects. And consciousness is also not completely determined by the material world. It is important to avoid both of these extreme misinterpretations of the relationship between matter and consciousness, idealism and mechanical materialism. Idealism views consciously as completely separate from material reality, or upholds the idea that consciousness completely determines the material world. Idealism thus overstates the independence of consciousness from matter. Mechanical materialism views consciousness as completely determined by the material world, and sees consciousness as an illusionary phenomenon that cannot impact back on matter. Mechanical materialism thus understates the independence of consciousness from matter. Dialectical materialism correctly interprets the relationship between matter and consciousness by viewing consciousness as relatively independent from matter. Matter and consciousness have their own internal development process, but they also mutually develop one another. The relative independence of social consciousness from social being reflects the relative independence of consciousness from matter. Social consciousness development is determined by social being, but there are also internal relationships within social consciousness which lead to internal development of social consciousness. Ideologies have the highest potential to impact the social being and material base of human society through conscious practical activities. The level of impact of ideology on the development of society depends on various factors. Because ideology's development is so complex, we must differentiate the roles of progressive ideology and anti-progressive ideology as each pertains to social development. The historical development of social consciousness shows that certain forms of consciousness tend to emerge first and have a strong impact on the other forms of consciousness. This pattern of development occurs in almost every historical era and is determined by specific historical circumstances. Different kinds of social consciousness forms will have more prominent and influential roles in the development of different human societies and at different stages of development of those societies. And an important mission of communists and the working class is to push back against such capitalist social consciousness forms and to build ideologies and social institutions which advance and defend communist social consciousness forms. Developing the social consciousness of the working class is an important prerequisite to social revolution, which will lead to a dictatorship of the proletariat and, eventually, an end to capitalism and class society altogether. The political consciousness of the revolutionary class orients the progressive development of other forms of consciousness. Political struggle is one of the most important battlefields in class struggle. Political consciousness must orient morality consciousness. Communists must teach workers about the unethical nature of capitalist exploitation of workers. Political consciousness must orient legal consciousness. Communists must make it clear that the legal system must be on the side of the workers. Political consciousness must orient aesthetic consciousness. Art, entertainment, and other forms of media are vital for influencing the social consciousness of the workers. It is important to remember the principle of general relationships of dialectical materialism, which states that all things, phenomena, and ideas are dialectically related to each other and mutually develop each other. All social consciousness forms are ultimately related to political consciousness. All of these forms of social consciousness, taken together in unity, impact back on the social being of society.
I don't know if I can answer that question up there. This point is how you stress materialism to idealism without removing their intellectual agency and responsibility. I think so, but okay. Social consciousness can affect the social being. Historical materialism not only criticizes the idealist viewpoint, absolutizing the role of social consciousness, but also rejects the viewpoint of vulgar materialism or economic materialism, i.e., negating the positive effect of social consciousness in social life. According to Engels, you're good. According to Engels, political, judicial, philosophical, religious, literacy, artistic, etc. is based on economic development. But all these react upon one another and also upon the economic base. Absolutization refers to holding a belief or opposition to all as always true in all situations and without exception. This concept, remember, idealism is the position that consciousness determines the material, which we disagree with. Idealism is further explained. Oh yeah. Idealism absolutizes social consciousness by holding the position that human consciousness determines the material in all situations and without exceptions, which we disagree with. Vulgar materialism, also known as economic materialism, is a form of mechanical materialism which holds the opposite position. It absolutizes the supposition that the material fully and completely determines consciousness without exception. The Vietnamese Student Dictionary defines vulgar materialism as, and this is what the students do, the trend of the mechanical materialist philosophical movement appearing in Germany in the mid-19th century. Vulgar materialism is a spontaneous reaction to scientific materialism, to idealist philosophy, first and foremost, ancient philosophy. It makes the basic principles of materialism poor and crude. Not only did they dismiss idealism and religion, but they also dismissed philosophy in general. They wanted to solve all philosophical problems in the concrete study of natural science. Dialectical materialism avoids errors of absolutization, which both idealism and vulgar materialism suffer from, by recognizing the true relationships between matter and consciousness. Matter determines consciousness, while consciousness can impact upon the matter. And that's like dialectical materialism and materialist dialectics. So dialectical materialism is matter determines consciousness, and then the materialist dialectics is consciousness can impact upon matter. As Engels goes on to explain in his letter to Borgius, Borgius, it is not that the economic position is the cause and alone activity, while everything else only has a passive effect. There is rather interaction on the basis of the economic necessity, which ultimately always asserts itself. The state, for instance, exercises an influence by tariffs, free trade, good or bad fiscal systems. So it is not, as people try here and there conveniently to imagine, that the economic position produces an automatic effect. Men make their history themselves only in giving surroundings which conditions it, and on the basis of actual relations already existing, among which the economic relations, however much they may be influenced by the other political and ideological ones, are still ultimately the decisive ones, forming the red thread which runs through them and alone leads to understanding. Men make their history themselves, but not as yet with the collective will or according to the collective plan, or even in an indefinitely defined given society. Their efforts clash, and for that reason all such societies are governed by necessity, which is supplemented by the appears under the forms of accident. The necessity which are asserted itself amidst all accident is gained ultimately economic necessity. The economic necessity which Engels describes here constitutes the objective need, which is a primary driver of human history and development of class society. The primary objective need is the need to suitability between relations of production and productive forces. This is the basis of the law of suitability. Objective need which arises in the material base is therefore what drives all class struggles and development of class society. And this same sort of objective needs is what will lead all social revolution and the downfall of capitalism and class society. It is therefore highly important that anyone pursuing social revolution should deeply understand the relationships between material and consciousness, between social being and social consciousness, between the base and the superstructure, and how objective economic needs drive change in human society. The degree of influence which ideology has on social development depends on many factors, including, but not limited to, specific historical conditions in which the ideology developed, the nature of economic relations within a social base as the time of the development of social consciousness, which the ideology is derived from, the historical roles of the class which carries the ideology, the accuracy with which the ideology reflects, and the objective mission of the class which carries the ideology, the extent of popular adoption of the ideology among the masses. An ideology is simply a system of ideas which has been developed and adopted by groups of human beings. The word can also be used to collectively refer to all of the ideologies of human society, i.e., the entire system of human thought as it exists at given time. Ideology is a form of social consciousness, can impact the development of human society, but it cannot determine the course of development of human society. This is because only social being and the material base can determine such development. In order to understand how ideology can impact social development, one must seek a comprehensive and historical perspective, which means understanding how ideology has developed and changed over time, as well as the internal and external relationships which lead to that development. In particular, this demands an analysis of the ideological factors of these aspects of human society. That was short. Should I keep going? Yeah. You gotta keep going. Yeah. Oh my gosh, they really hate me on this, don't they? Every time I appeal, it wins. I don't get it. Yeah, good to see you too, Nightshade. Good to see you. Historical conditions. In seeking to understand how ideology impacts human society, one must examine the historical conditions in which the ideology developed. This is because ideology, like all things, phenomena, and ideas, is constantly changing and developing over time. This change comes about through internal and external relationships, which themselves occur and develop over time. Only by understanding the historical development of an ideology can one hope to understand the essence of that ideology and how it might continue to develop into the future. It is also vital to understand the economic relations within the social being at the time of development of the social consciousness, which the ideology is derived from. This is because social being determines the social consciousness, and thus determines the ideology can and will manifest in any given stage of development of human society. For example, one must understand the historical conditions of the 19th century to understand how and why communism developed as it did when Marx and Engels were first formulating its founding principles. One must also understand how those conditions changed and developed in the following decades into the 20th century through the founding of the Soviet Union and various other socialist movements and states, the suppression of communist and capitalist imperialist nations, and so on. To understand how communism as an ideology has developed and changed, as well as how it exists and is developing in our present day. Economic relations. The relations of production which exist during the development of ideology will determine to a great extent how the ideology develops and manifests in human society. Marx and Engels held that studying ideology in of itself divorces from the economic conditions in which the ideology arose, was a waste of time which could never lead to a complete accurate understanding. This perspective is Take, for example, the development of both communist and capitalist ideologies. Neither communist ideologies, which holds that workers should seize the means of production from capitalists, nor capitalist ideology, which holds that capitalism should maintain private ownership of the means of production, could have developed in earlier stages of development which preceded private capital. Why does water, which take for example, oh, I already did that. Hey, Dutch. Both capitalist ideology and communist ideology would have been nonsensical during feudal times, when the essential means of production were privately owned by capitalists and the ruling class consisted of feudal lords. Capitalist relations of production had to first develop as a prerequisite of both communist and capitalist ideology to develop. In this manner, the relations of production determined the existence of communist and capitalist ideology. Capitalist ideology came into being as a result of the objective needs which started within the economic base of society. Historical roles of class. Each ideology is developed within the context of class. In order to understand the essence of an ideology, one must understand the essence of the class which breedeth it. This includes not just how the class exists at a given point of time, but also how it developed historically and how that development led to the development of ideology itself. For example, in order to understand communist ideology, one must study the development of the working class. Only by studying the working class, how it originated, how it was struggling against the capitalist class, and how it has changed over time, can one come to understanding communist ideology and how it has impacted human society. Similarly, in order to understand bourgeoisie ideology, one must understand the role in history of the capitalist class. Jesus, they hate me today. Hold on a second. The role in history of the capitalist class. Just one must study the history of monarchs, nobles, noble lords, and clergy in order to understand dominant ideologies of feudal society. It is also important to understand that every class has a mission. This mission reflects the objective needs a class has to pursue its own agenda and to benefit as greatly as possible from the means of production of the volume from which the translates, which occurs scientific stuff. So like part 4 of the volume from which this text translated, which covers the topic of scientific socialism, to find the historical missions of the working class under capitalism. Okay. The historical mission of working class is to lead the working people to fight and eliminate capitalism and to erase all exploitative and oppressive regimes, to build new societies, namely socialism and then communism. In Anti-Düring, Engels defines historical missions of the working class as 1. Becoming the ruling class by establishing the dictatorship of the proletariat. 2. Seizing the means of production from the ruling class to end class society. Let's see here. When's the next thing? Hold on, let me find out. This page is 185. Let me see. 185. Oh, there we go. We'll stop there. Okay, 185. Okay, no, I'm not going to stop here. There's a little bit more to go, and not too much. And then we go to your notes. Okay. Popularity of adoption among the masses. Understanding how ideology impacts society requires one to understand the spread of its influence throughout the masses of the human population. The more popular held an ideology is, the more impact it can have on society at large. This is one reason that capitalists spend huge amount of resources to spread bourgeoisie ideologies among the working class throughout history and to our present day. Understanding how ideas are spread and promoted on the one hand and how they are suppressed and negated on the other is critical to understanding how ideology can impact human society. This is critical to the mission of scientific socialism, which has a goal of spreading communist ideology to the working masses in order to negate the influence of bourgeois propaganda and indoctrination, and to strengthen the resolve of workers to bring about the end of capitalism as quickly as possible. It is also necessary to distinguish the roles of progressive ideology from the roles of reactionary ideology, as it permits to the development of society. The fundamental principles of dialectical materialism is a principle of development, which principle holds that change is inevitable. All things, phenomena, and ideas undergo processes of motion and development. Any philosophy, ideology, or strategy which attempts to restrain motion and development is doomed to failure because change can neither be halted nor restrained. Thus, our strategy and actions must align with the material reality that change is inevitable, and we must seek to change the world by impacting processes of development and motion, rather than attempting to reverse, restrain, or halt such processes. Progressive ideology is ideology which accurately reflects reality by correctly interpreting the ways in which human society developed over time. In the context of our current capitalist society, progressive ideology recognizes the role and mission of the working class as progressive class, which will bring about an end to class society. Such ideology is considered progressive because it does not seek to impede or reverse the development of human society, but rather to seek its further progress, the progress of humanity in moving towards communism. Reactionary ideology seeks to impede or reverse the progression of development of human society. In our current capitalist society, this most typically means preserving and furthering the power and position of the capitalist class as the ruling class of society. Such ideology is called reactionary because it exists as a reaction to progressive forces of historical development. In the words of the Communist manifestos, reactionaries try to roll back the wheel of history. All right, we have a picture. Here we go. We got bourgeoisie ideology, progressive and reactionary, social consciousness, social being the base, feudal economy, capitalist economy, the reactionary. All right. The same ideology may be reactionary or progressive depending on its relations to present economic conditions and class relations. During the feudal era, bourgeoisie ideology was progressive. In today, capitalist society, it is reactionary. Thank you. He mean more direct answers like the beers capture the market. Hold on a second. There are many variations of ideology which can fall along progressive and reactionary lines. It is necessary to seek a comprehensive and historical perspective to properly identify ideology as progressive or reactionary. Some ideology may have been progressive in past eras, but would be considered reactionary today. For instance, during the end of the feudal era, ideologies which promoted the power and positions of bourgeoisie was progressive, in the sense that it sought to move human society's development away from feudal era. Today, those same ideas would be considered reactionary, as they seek to maintain the status quo of class society. It is also possible for reactionary ideology to falsely pose as progressive ideology. There are many instances, for instance, of reactionary movements claiming to represent the interests of the workers, or even mixing reactionary ideology in with progressive ideology to corrupt, co-opt, and hamper the movements. It is also common for ideologies which is idealist, metaphysical, or otherwise flawed to affect progressive ideology. As such, great care must be taken to seek out reactionary elements and characteristics of ideology and to critique and correct them. Hold on a second. Yeah, that's the conclusion. Okay, we're gonna stop there and go ahead and do your notes. Are you there?
Um,
No,
where
you're
did we
good.
start? Because I was doing the conclusion. We stopped at the conclusion?
Yes,
This
I
is a
stopped that
question.
conclusion. Yes, I stopped that conclusion so you can do your notes.
Okay, cool. Okay. The interplay between forms of social consciousness and their development. The interplay between forms of social consciousness is a reason why, in each form of social consciousness, there are aspects and properties that cannot be explained directly by examining social being. This relationship is one in which social consciousness is relatively independent of, but also determined by, and can impact back upon social being. Social consciousness is relatively independent from social being, just as consciousness in general is relatively independent from the material world in general. Relative independence is not the same as complete independence. Complete independence, I think I went too far back. I think I did those notes already. Did I?
I'm not the one that kept track of the notes. I'm sorry.
No, I don't know. I don't know where we stopped.
I don't remember. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, that's the last big black writing, the big bold writing, so I'm going to just go from there. Relative independence is not the same as complete independence. Complete independence would imply a complete lack of connection between two subjects. Consciousness is also not completely determined by the material world. It is important to avoid both of these extreme misinterpretations of the relationship between matter and consciousness, idealism and mechanical materialism. The relative independence of social consciousness from social being reflects the relative independence of social consciousness from matter. Social consciousness development is determined by social being, but there are also internal relationships within social consciousness which lead to internal development of social consciousness. Ideologies have the highest potential to impact the social being and material base of human society through consciousness, private, practical activities. The level of... I did this one already. I have to have messed up somewhere.
You want me to just continue on, and then we'll just pick up from there? Because you don't know, and I don't know either.
Yeah. Just go, because I remember all this stuff too well, so I don't know.
Remember, we started at conclusion now. So, Adam, bookmark there, maybe.
So I'm putting the bookmark there now.
No. This is what Joe is writing down in notes and highlighting so we can go back over it and redo it to what they picked up. Yeah. So, yeah. Also, we have a YouTube channel that we just put the readers on so people can just listen to it. We don't do much like that. Kind of a glorified reading out loud for everybody type deal. If I had more interaction, more people coming up and asking questions and actually driving conversations, it'd be different. Conclusion. Historical materialism upholds the principle of relative independence of social consciousness. This principle paints a complex portrait of the historical development of social consciousness. It reflects all metaphysical, mechanical materialist, and vulgar materialist conceptions of the relationship between social being and social consciousness. Yeah, I think it's called what's the channel called, Joe? An YouTube channel?
I think the YouTube channel is on my link.
It's in Lynn's bio too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's on Lynn's bio, definitely.
In summary, according to Marxist materialist viewpoint, the two fundamental principles of historical materialism are: 1, the principle of social being determines social consciousness, and 2, the principle of relative independence of social consciousness. These principles serve as fundamental methodological foundations of cognitive and practical activities of scientific socialism. Therefore, we must strive to perceive phenomenon of social consciousness in the context of the social being which gave rise to it. At the same time, it is also necessary to be able to explain those same phenomena of social consciousness in the context of relative. These principles are derived from dialectical materialism conception of the relationship between matter and consciousness, which is described. Understanding these principles puts historical materialism on the objective and the scientific basis of explaining. In order to effect change in human society, it is vital to understand how development processes occur and what drives change and development in human society. Rejection of metaphysical, mechanical, and vulgar materialist conceptions of the relationship of social being and social consciousness is necessary because such conceptions stand as barriers to progress of the mission of scientific socialism. The same can be said for idealist conceptions of relationships between social being and social consciousness. Metaphysical materialist conceptions of relationships between social being and social consciousness view social phenomena in a static, abstract manner. Social being and social consciousness, according to this view, are broken down into fixed categories which do not change over time. For instance, aspects of human nature might be seen as unchanging and unalterable characteristics, and metaphysical materialists tend to define humanity by such innate and unchanging characteristics. Mechanical materialists' conception of the relationship between social being and social consciousness. Oh my gosh, another freaking, this is like the 8th one I've gotten so far. Like, I keep winning my fucking appeals. Conception of the relationship between social being and social consciousness view all things, phenomena, and ideas as machines, which simply carry out predictable and purely physical processes. Such views see as a giant mechanical machine composed of parts which are all essentially isolated from each other and static and unchangeable, simply carrying out material processes which human beings cannot fundamentally alter through conscious activity. Mechanical materialism is, therefore, a form of vulgar materialism and metaphysical materialism, since it seeks to understand reality by breaking it down into categories of mechanical parts which are static in nature. Vulgar and materialism. Conception. The relationship between a social being and social consciousness, essentially denying the role of human consciousness, including social consciousness, and the ability of consciousness to impact the material world, including social beings. Metaphysical, mechanical, and vulgar materialist viewpoints are all barriers to effective practical activities because they deny the ability for human beings to develop social consciousness and to impact back on social being through conscious activity. Such misconceptions about the nature of reality will invariably hamper and derail efforts to achieve the mission of scientific socialism and liberate humanity from the oppression of class society. Sweet. Idealist conception of the relationship between social beings and social consciousness hold that social consciousness determines and development of social being, and that human consciousness is a primary driver and motivating force of human history. Such conceptions deny the objective nature of human history and the principles of development, which govern and regulate the development of human society according to the idealist perspective of human history. Development of social consciousness is all that is required to effect change of human society, ignoring the determining role which social beings play in the development of humanity impedes practical activities by placing too much emphasis on human thought and mental activity while denying the importance of material activity and development. A common idealist deviation of socialist thought is utopianism, which holds that a perfect society can be conceived and through thought alone, and that socialism can be achieved simply by developing such theoretical models of the utopian society in the mind. Engels rebukes idealist and utopian socialism utopian and scientific. According to the idealist utopians, socialism is the expression of absolute truth, reason, and justice, and has only to be discovered to conquer all the world by virtue of its own power, and as an absolute truth is independent of time and space, and the historical development of man is a mere accident when and where it is discovered. With all this, absolute truth, reason, and justice are different with the founder of each different school, and as each one's special kind of absolute truth, reason, and justice is again conditioned by his subjective understanding, his conditions of existence, the measure of his knowledge, and his intellectual training. There is no other ending possible in this conflict of absolute truth than that they shall be mutually exclusive of one another. Hence, from this nothing could come but a kind of eclectic average socialism, which, as a matter of fact, has up to the present time dominated the minds of most of the socialist workers in France and England. Hence, the mishmash allowing the most manifold shades of opinion, the mishmash of such critical statements, economic theories, pictures of future society by the founders of different sects as excite a minimum of opposition, as mishmash, which is the more easily brewed and more definite sharp edges of the individual constitutes are rubbed down to the stream of debate, like rounding pebbles in a brook. To make the science of socialism, it has first to be placed upon the real basis. Historical materialism avoids the limitations of metaphysical materialism, mechanical materialism, vulgar materialism, and idealism by properly identifying the relationships between social beings and social consciousness, and by recognizing that human beings can impact social beings through social conscious activities, which is the basis of scientific socialist theory and practice. Scientific socialism is an application of dialectical materialist philosophy and historical materialist theory in the mission of overthrowing capitalism and building towards a stateless, classless society of communism. Human history is an important subject of study of scientific socialism because it is necessary to achieve a historical and comprehensive perspective of humanity and its development in order to effect change of human society. Therefore, in practice, the revolutionary construction of a new society needs to be carried out along the following lines. Revolution must be carried out simultaneously in the realms of both social beings and social consciousness. 2. Changing the old social being is the foundation for changing the social consciousness. 3. Changing social being led to profound changes of social consciousness, and also conversely, the effect of social consciousness in certain conditions can also create drastic and profound changes of social being. Revolution can be carried out in the realm of social being by developing the material base of social revolution. This requires the construction of social institutions such as worker unions and political parties, which can be impacted upon the economic base of human society. The most important achievement which workers must strive for is building a state which can function as the dictatorship of the proletariat. This gives workers the greatest ability to impact the material base through conscious activity and will allow for workers to eventually overcome and negate capitalism once and for all. Let me see here, hold on 1 second, it's getting close. Remember page number 189, real quick. This real quick, 189. Oof. Well, actually, page 192 will be the last, so we're going a little over. Okay, 189. Okay. Revolution can be carried out in the realm of social being by developing the material. Did I already read that? Oh yeah, I did. Revolution can be carried out in the realm of social consciousness by developing social consciousness, specifically the class consciousness of the working class. This requires a dialectical materialist worldview in workers, eradicating false consciousness in workers, and fighting against bourgeoisie and reactionary ideology, which is opposed upon the workers by the ruling class. The most effective way to impact and develop social consciousness is to build social institutions which can drive ideological progress through theoretical development and practical activity. This reflects the dialectical unity of theory and practice, which is revolutionary activities in the realms of social beings and social consciousness are dialectically related to one another. For example, improving material conditions for workers will make it easier for workers to develop class consciousness, since they might have more free time and resources for education. At the same time, improving class consciousness will lead to worker struggles in fighting for better material conditions, up to and including the development of social revolution and the establishment of the working class control of the state. It is therefore vital for workers to understand and leverage the historical materialist understanding of human society and the relationship between social consciousness and social being in order to successfully carry out social revolution, which will lead to the overthrowing of capitalist society, as philosophy of Marxist-Leninism explains. Social being, oh my gosh, again, these guys just don't resent, do they? God damn. Where was I at? Okay, yeah. Social being and social consciousness are two dialectically unified aspects of social life. Therefore, the work of reforming the old society and building a new society must carry out simultaneously through both social existence and social consciousness. It must be understood that changing social existence is the more basic condition for changing social consciousness. It must be further understood that change must also be sought in other directions, just as change of social existence inevitably lead to great changes in social consciousness of society. Social consciousness can also, under certain conditions, create strong and profound changes in social existence. Engels explains the way in which social consciousness can lead to change in social being in the letter to Joseph Bloch in 1890. The economic situation is the basis, but the various elements of the superstructure, political forms of the class struggle, and its result is wit, constitution established by the various classes after its successful battle, etc. Judicial forms, and even the reflexes of all these actual struggles in the brains of the participants, political, juristic, philosophical theories, religious views, and their further development into systems of dogmas, also exercises their influence upon the course of the historical struggles, in many cases preponderant in determining their form. There is an interaction of all these elements in which, amid all the endless hosts of accidents, that is, the things and events whose interconnections is so remote and so impossible of proof that we can regard it as non-existing and negligible. The economic movement finally asserts itself as necessary. Otherwise, the application of the theory in any period of history would be easier than the solution of a simple equation of the first degree. We're almost there, everybody. Where is it at? There it is. All right. What is there to be done? Lenin explains the role of social consciousness and wages social revolution. Without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. The role of the vanguard fighter can be fulfilled only by a party that is guided by the most advanced theory. To thoroughly grasp this methodological principle in the cause of socialist revolution in our country, we must, on the one hand, grasp the importance of the cultural ideological revolution and promote the positive impact of social consciousness on the economic development and industrialization of modernization of the country. On the other hand, we must avoid repeating the mistakes of Voltairism in building culture and building new societies. What's that word? See. Please say you'll read it out loud.
In what
Nope.
is to be done.
What's that word? Voluntarism. Voluntarism.
I think you got it. Voluntarism.
Is a philosophical, put it in the, yeah, thank you. Yes, that's it. No, it's voluntarism. VOLUNTARISM.
Yeah, it's
So-
voluntarism. It's like volunteerism.
Yeah, is a philosophical position and methodological practice of placing subjective will as a primary determinator and decision and activities. Subjective will includes the goals, desires, and intentions of individual humans and or groups of human beings. Voluntarism, therefore, is a form of idealism, since it overemphasizes the subjective consciousness of human beings while ignoring the roles of matter in determining consciousness. Lieutenant Colonel Deng Fan defines the philosophical error of voluntarism in the articles "Voluntarism is the dangerous disease that needs to be avoided," published in 2020 in Wangan newspaper. Willpower is one of the factors that makes up a person's character and courage. However, if we only rely on personal willpower without following objective laws or consider willpower as a universal key to solving all problems without starting from the basis of real life, it is voluntarism. One of the manifestations of the disease of communist arrogance that can easily cause revolutionaries to fail and deteriorate. Voluntarists often have a common or characteristic of examining, perceiving, and evaluating things and phenomena based on subjective feelings. They consider their opinions to be always correct, even solely correct. Voluntarism used to be one of the mistakes of a segment of communists in the world. These communists considered human will as a primary determinant for reforming the changing the world. This perspective denies the objective laws of nature and society. Voluntarists have hasty thoughts and excessive optimism. They want to quickly achieve results and goals without carefully consideration, objective, comprehensive, and thorough evaluations of all issues and aspects. They easily succumb to illusions about subjective strength without anticipating all the difficulties and obstacles caused by both objective and subjective factors. A number of cadres and party members in the past, when looking ahead, often used rose-tinted glasses. So they more or less stumbled and made mistakes on the revolutionary path in the particular activities. This was partly due to the lack of scientific information and partly due to the lack of thorough understanding of the torturous complexities of the process of building a new social regime. Voluntarism manifests itself in many aspects that are difficult to detect at first, but once we become aware of the nature of voluntarism, it becomes more easier to identify. For example, one common cause of voluntarism, which I can't say, is the failure by a group of decision makers to carefully study the actual situation. This leads to inappropriate decision being made. Another common cause of voluntarism arises from the phenomenon of new officials, new policies. Many cadres in the early stages of holding leadership positions always appeared eager and overly concerned with social approval. Such cadres often wish to quickly create their own mark, so they feel they must put forward programs, plans, proposals, and projects with positive and brilliant goals. They are unrealistic targets for beautiful but unfeasible numbers. Ultimately, these ambitions measures cause more harm than good. What is more alarming is that many times voluntarism does not necessarily originate from immature thinking, immature awareness, or hasty thoughts, but rather it originates from very sophisticated group interests. They act in the name of organization to issue programs and policies that benefit the minority of individuals with the power and authority. This leads to many consequences and can even lead to an unpredictable socioeconomic consequences for the community and the country. And we'll stop there and you could do your notes. Fucking hell.
All right. Let's get started. All right. Bookmarks 187. Conclusion. Historical materialism upholds the principle of relative independence of social consciousness. In summary, according to the Marxist materialist viewpoint, the two fundamental principles of historical materialism are: 1. The principle that social being determines social consciousness, and 2. The principle of the relative independence of social consciousness. These principles serve as fundamental methodological foundations of cognitive and practical activities of scientific socialists. These principles are derived from the dialectical materialist conception of the relationship between matter and consciousness. In order to effect change in human society, it is vital to understand how development processes occur and what drives change and development in human society. Metaphysical materialist conceptions of the relationship between social being and social consciousness view social phenomenon in a static, abstract manner. Social being and social consciousness, according to this viewpoint, are broken down into fixed categories which do not change over time.
Open this real quick. You have a really moment strain.
Mechanical materialist conceptions of the relationship between social beings and social consciousness view all things, phenomena, and ideas as machines, which simply carry out predictable and purely physical processes. Such views see as a giant mechanical machine composed of parts which are all essentially isolated from each other and static and unchangeable, simply carrying out material processes which human beings cannot fundamentally alter through conscious activities. Vulgar materialist conceptions of the relationship between social being and social consciousness essentially deny the role of human consciousness, including social consciousness, and the ability of consciousness to impact on the material world, including social being. Metaphysical, mechanical, and vulgar materialist viewpoints are all barriers to effective practical activities because they deny the ability for human beings to develop social consciousness and to impact back on social being through conscious activity. Idealist conceptions of the relationship between social being and social consciousness hold that social consciousness determines the development of social being, and that human consciousness is the primary driver and motivating force of human history. Historical materialism avoids the limitations of metaphysical materialism, mechanical materialism, vulgar materialism, and idealism by properly identifying the relationship between social being and social consciousness, and by recognizing that human beings can impact social being through socially conscious activity, which is the basis for scientific socialist theory and practice. Scientific socialism is the application of dialectical materialist philosophy and historical materialist theory in the mission of overthrowing capitalism and building towards the stateless, classless society of communism. I don't know if you caught that. The stateless, classless society of communism. Human history is an important subject of study for scientific socialists because it is necessary to achieve a historical and comprehensive perspective of humanity and its development in order to effect change in human society. Therefore, in practice, the revolutionary construction of a new society needs to be carried out along the following lines. 1. Revolution must be carried out simultaneously in the realms of both social being and social consciousness. Changing the old social being is the foundation for changing the old social consciousness. 3. Changes in social being lead to profound changes in social consciousness. And also, conversely, the effects of social consciousness in certain conditions can also create drastic and profound changes in social being. Revolution can be carried out in the realm of social being by developing a material basis for social revolution. Revolution can be carried out in the realm of social consciousness by developing the social consciousness of the working class. The most effective way to impact and develop social consciousness is to build social institutions which can drive ideological processes through theoretical development and practical activity. Revolutionary activities in the realms of social being and social consciousness are dialectically related to one another. It is vital for workers to understand and leverage a historical materialist understanding of human society and the relationship between social consciousness and social being in order to successfully carry out social revolution, which will lead to the overthrow of capitalism and class society. Voluntarism is a philosophical position and methodological practice of placing subjective will as the primary determinator of decisions and activities. Subjective will includes the goals, desires, and intentions of individual humans and/or groups of human beings. Voluntarism, therefore, is a form of idealism, since it overemphasizes the subjective consciousness of human beings while ignoring the role of matter in determining consciousness. Voluntarism manifests itself in many aspects that are difficult to detect at first, but once we become aware of the nature of voluntarism, it becomes much easier to identify. Many cadres in the early stages of holding leadership positions always appear eager and overly concerned with social approval. Such cadres often wish to quickly create their own mark, so they feel they must put forward programs, plans, proposals, and projects with positive and brilliant goals. They set unrealistic targets for beautiful but unfeasible numbers. Ultimately, these ambitious measures cause more harm than good. What is more alarming is that many times voluntarism does not necessarily originate from immature thinking, immature awareness, or hasty thoughts, but rather it originates from very sophisticated group interests. They act in the name of the organization to issue programs and policies that benefit a minority of individuals with power and authority. This leads to many consequences and can even lead to unpredictable socio-economic consequences for the community and the country. That's it.
All right, and it looks like that I stopped a little sooner, but it's no big deal. We can go over it just a little bit. But if I would have went on further, I could have ended the chapter, but we'll be fine. We'll be fine. We'll hit chapter 4 sometime tomorrow. probably pretty quickly. It's the categories of social economic formation and the natural historical process of the development of different social economic formations. Number one would be category of social economic formations. So we're going to dabble in that after we're done with the conclusion, which I didn't realize I only had 3 more pages, but oh well, it's fine, right?
Rocket Surgeon, if you want to come up and ask some questions, now's the time.
Sounds like Rocket Surgeon got you to, you answered their question, it seems like, because they said that you did. Well, also, if Rocket Surgeon, if you get with Joe or Lynn, we do have a library server full of PDF, communist literature, revolutionary literature, and all that stuff. If you want to join the server, you're welcome to. If you want to get more information, they do readings inside that too. Okay? So, other than that,
we're going to be starting book 1 of this set Tuesday at 5 p.m. Central.
oh,
So if you want to show up to our reading of book 1, where we're going to go over it section by section and answer all the questions, 5 p.m. Central, I'll be in the reading server.
all right, everybody. Looks like I got my 12th restriction. Yay! I've gotten like 12 to 14 different restrictions. I'm going to go ahead and close it out. And I wish everybody a whole time. Please eat, drink, take care of yourself as much as possible. We need all the comrades we can get out there. All right? All right. Talk to y'all later.
Tuesday.
Yeah, I might do a live later. All right, good night.